Thank you, everybody, for coming along with me to the latest edition of the Purple Knights podcast. And we've got a real treat today. Probably my favorite guest that I've ever had on the podcast. And it's been 2 years since she was first on, but I'm very happy to welcome back the one and only Dr. Susan Rogers. How you doing, Susan?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thank you very much. That's high praise. You're flattering me, but thank you very much for inviting me back to talk with you and with your listeners. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for being here. And of course, today we're going to talk a bit about your new book that recently came out, and it's this is what it sounds like. What the music you love says about you. And I I was going to say your co-author's name, but I don't want to butcher it, so I'll let you handle that.
That's a funny name. His name is Ogi Ogas.
Okay.
Ogi Ogas. Ogi's a PhD in computational neuroscience, and he approached me in Boston 3 years ago. And he said, "How would you like to write a book about music?" And I said, "Well, I really shouldn't because I don't know that much about it. I mean, my students are formally trained in music and they know music theory better than I do. They all perform, they're trained musicians." And I said, well, what I could write a book about is something I've been doing my whole adult life, listening. If you're a record producer, a recording engineer, you're a professional listener. And then, of course, I studied and earned my PhD in music perception and cognition. So I have book learning about listening. I have practical experience with listening. So that's what this book is about. It's about the listener profile.
Yes. And that's how we're going to approach today's podcast. So a little bit different format than we're used to, but I thought rather than just offering a static summary of the contents of the book, that we delve into the listener profile, which is certainly the core of the book. Um, so I what I did was I chose two songs that I love very much, and we're going to delve into them via the listener profile and see where my sweet spots are in terms of being a music listener. So, Susan, how do you want to start this record pull off?
Okay, well, let me start for the audience by describing two things. I'd like to describe a record poll, but before I do that, I want to describe the model of music listening that the book is discussing. And
Wonderful.
this book, by the way, is written for the lay audience. It's for people like me who are non-musicians, who don't play or write or sing, but who love music like crazy. Of course, musicians who read it will get something from it, but it's for music lovers, whether they're musicians or not. So in our brains, there are at least 7 different ways that we can get a reward of dopamine or a reward of adrenaline from listening to music. I learned about these things in school, and one of the 7, I learned about in the recording studio. So what that means is when we're listening to a record, your brain is scanning all the different elements of that record, and it's being like a dog at the dog park. It's looking for where the fun is. It's looking for where the treats are. So what we do automatically and unconsciously is we scan the 4 dimensions of music, which are melody, lyrics, rhythm, and timbre. Timbre is sound itself. And we scan the 3 dimensions that are aesthetic dimensions and apply to movies, books, television, dance. Those dimensions just happen to be novelty versus familiarity. Some people like their records to be avant-garde, groundbreaking. Other people like their records to be more traditional. Another aesthetic dimension is realism versus abstraction. Some people like their records to reflect the real world of real musicians in the studio performing. Other people like their techno or their electronic music that was made in the computer and didn't necessarily reflect real people in the studio all at the same time making music together. And then the third and final aesthetic dimension is the dimension of authenticity. Authenticity is very subjective. It's your notion of the genuineness of the musical performances, and also where you think those performances are coming from. Is that singer singing her heart out? Is that bass player feeling that groove down in his hips, down in his toes? Can you believe this performance or not? So between the 4 musical dimensions and the 3 aesthetic dimensions, we've got 7 different ways in which music can please us. Now, on each one of these dimensions, each one of us has a sweet spot. A sweet spot is where music feels most perfect for you. Some people like their lyrics to be simple and plain. Some people like their lyrics to be a little bit more poetic and abstract. We all have our sweet spots for everything. Those 7 sweet spots, now you can think of, I'm going to mix my metaphors here, but pick, imagine the 7 sweet spots are a constellation of 7 stars out there in the cosmos where there's an unimaginable number of stars. So pick 7 stars that form a constellation. That's your listener profile. If you listen to any given record, it might land equidistant from all of those stars. And you like it well enough, but it doesn't attract you. It's okay. You can evaluate it and yeah, it's okay, but it doesn't really attract you. However, if a given record just so happens to be positioned near any one, or preferably more, of the sweet spots, your stars, you'll feel a magnetic or a gravitational pull toward that record. That rhythm's going to be just right for you. That sound design's going to be just right. And all it takes is one. It only has to please you on one dimension. And you're pleased. You got your dopamine hit. Now, sometimes you ask people, what kind of music do you like? And they'll nearly always say, I like all kinds. I like all kinds of music. And I want to say back to them, of course you do. Of course you do. Because the music in your playlist was chosen for many different qualities. Sometimes you feel like hearing something innovative, and sometimes you feel like hearing something that's maybe a little bit more realistic, or sometimes you feel like hearing things with a big, wide, sweeping melody, or with a slower tempo or a faster tempo. We all have these different ways in which music can satisfy us. You and I, Chris, each have our own unique listener profile. Everyone on earth has a unique listener profile. This is what makes music so varied and so great. We're
Yep.
serving so many different tastes.
Yep, I agree. And I'm one of those people that I was just telling somebody today that my musical tastes are vast and varied, and I like all different types of genres. In fact, I can't really say that I really unequivocally hate any genre of music, because there's always exceptions in every genre
Right.
that I that I'm really drawn to, and that really have elements that I really love. So
Yes. Our taste in music is similar to our taste in food. You know, sometimes we want something sweet, and sometimes we want something salty, and sometimes something savory, and sometimes high fat, sometimes low fat. Music's job out there in the world is to be functional, to function for listeners. In the recording studio, we manipulate its form. We make decisions about how it should go, just like the chef makes decisions about how his or her food should be compiled. But it's the functionality of it that makes it work. When you listen to a record, or when you sit at a restaurant and you order a plate of food, that food has to function for you, and preferably it'll taste good too. It has to hit your sweet spot for taste. And likewise with music. And that's why, just as our taste in fashion and food is varied, so is our taste in music. I'm urging people in this book to never be a music snob. When someone tells you about the music they love, even if you don't like it, recognize that they're telling you, this works for me. This functions in my life. Their music is just as valid as yours.
Yep. Yep. I agree. And that's the approach I've always taken. I've always tended to have a very open mind and a very diplomatic personality. So I've never shamed anyone or looked down upon them for their music taste.
Right.
But yeah, as you say, music has to be functional and work for for the listener. And I love also in the book how you describe that there's a loop of the music experience, right? There's the creation of the music, and then there's the listener who processes it and uh, takes it within themselves and analyzes it, and it sort of completes a loop of music listening. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, when we're in the recording studio making records, we're on output. Musicians are on output, and they're putting words, melodies, harmonies, sounds out there into the world. And that job is only half done, just like when a chef sends a plate of food out to the kitchen, or right out from the kitchen to the server. It's not a meal until someone consumes it. And likewise, music isn't completely music until someone listens to it. We need listeners who are on input and who are receiving this music. Now, the interesting thing to me, the wonderful mystery, is that if a group of us were all in a room and someone was playing a record, acoustically speaking, we'd all be hearing the exact same pattern of air molecules going back and forth. It's the same for all of us. But once it gets up here into our brains, it becomes a different record for every single listener. Some people will like it, some won't. Some will be familiar with it, some won't. Some will focus on one part of it, others will focus on a different part. Some people will be bored by it, other people will be thrilled by it. It's a unique record in every listener's brain based on where that record happens to land in the vicinity of your sweet spots, either close or far from them.
Right, right. And one thing you mentioned that the book is for the layperson, and I very much appreciate that. There are some neuroscientific concepts that are touched upon that are very challenging, but in a good way. It makes you think. It makes you think about the processes of the brain and how everything is processed just within a matter of milliseconds. And I
Yes.
wanted to say that the diagrams and the illustrations that are in the book are very helpful at breaking down the concepts and making them
Thank you.
digestible and making it easy to engage with what you're trying to present and the concepts you're illustrating. I thought they were very well done.
Thank you.
And yeah, so I really enjoy this book. And you know, lovers of music, which I know there are some out there that don't connect with music, and there's a little bit of a passage in the book even about that. But most of us, I would say, the majority of people that I've come in contact with in my life, all music resonates for all of us. And so, if you're a fan of music, of listening to music, especially, this book is really essential reading. I would suggest that everybody go out and get a copy.
Oh.
Um, I'm very excited to do a record poll here today. Uh, did we actually talk about what a record poll
No.
is?
Yeah, you remembered. Thank you. I wanted to tell your listeners what a record poll is. So
Yes.
I first got introduced to a record poll when I was in the music business as a fairly young engineer, younger than I am now. Producer I was working with said, "Hey guys, it's time for a record poll." A record poll is like a song poll. So in the traditional song poll, group of songwriters get together and you basically just pass an acoustic guitar around the room and you take turns playing the song you've just written or are in the process of writing for one another. Song poll. But a record poll is different. Anybody can do a record poll. So the way a record poll works is you have to bring to the poll 2 or 3 records that you just love, records that make you weak in the knees, records that just expand your heart, that you love more than anything. Now, your job when it's your turn to play a record for your poll mates is you have to say why you love this record. And you can't say something like, oh, I don't know, I just really like it, or oh, it just reminds me of, when I was in high school. No, no, no. You have to talk about that record, and you have to be able to say, here's what I love. Here's why this record and not that record excites me. Now, the great thing about a record poll is, one, you're sharing with your poll mates, your friends, a really intimate part of yourself. You're
Right.
saying, these lyrics spoke to me when I needed fill in the blank here, or this rhythm lifted me up, or this groove. So you have to describe the record and say why you love this record so much. What happens is you're more in touch with your listener profile because you kind of had to do some preparation before the record poll. 2, your friends are getting that intimate glimpse into your psyche. When we listen to music, it's private. No one else is in our heads. We go to our private place when we listen to music. And during a record poll, you have a chance to take your friends with you for just a moment into that private place in your psyche to let them know why you like this record so much. And then the third advantage that you get from a record poll is you get turned on to some great music. You get to know your friends better, they get to know you, and you get to learn about some music that you might not otherwise have paid attention to. So my friend, a client of mine, Michael Penn, played a record by Elvis Costello at my first record poll, and he pointed out the lyrics that were just crazy great. I became a fan of that record on the spot. The producer, Tony Berg, played a record with an incredible chord change, put his hands over his heart, like, oh, just swooned when that chord change came. I became a fan of that record on the spot. And I hope the records I played did something for them too.
Yes, and I should mention that there's a website associated with the book, and
Mhm.
this is what it sounds like.com,
Right.
and you can go and listen to all of the tracks that are mentioned in the book, so you can do like a virtual, almost like a virtual record poll by yourself with this book, and it's very interactive and very engaging in that way, and it really drives home the 7 dimensions of listening as you're listening to these songs, these examples of each of the dimensions. It really drives home what they are and what you should be listening for when you're speaking in terms of the 7 dimensions of music listening. So the website is really, really awesome. And I appreciated that as well, the interactive aspect to it.
Thanks, Chris. I should mention for your listeners as well that this book isn't about my taste in music. The records that I describe in the book, many of them are records I love. Some of them are records that I just use to illustrate the point. The
Right.
book is not about my taste in music. It's about your taste, the reader's taste in music. With a great variety of music mentioned in that book, the odds are at least 1 or 2 of those songs is going to be something that you really love.
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. Um, so do we want to get straight into my 2 songs, or should we?
I would love to. I'd love to. Yeah.
Okay, which one should we start out with?
Whichever you prefer.
Okay, well, this is the Purple Knights podcast after all, so I have to go with my man Prince. And the record I chose for this record pull is I Could Never Take the Place of Your Man off the Sign of the Times album. Now, did you engineer that track?
Yes, we were working at Sunset Sound in Los Angeles. He wanted something fairly fast tempo. I think in that particular moment he wasn't in the mood to write. So occasionally when things were like that, he would have me pull up something from the vault we had a lot of old tapes there at Sunset, and we brought up I Could Never Take the Place of Your Man, which was something he had originally recorded a long time ago. So the drums were from a long time ago, but in fact, I wish I could remember how it originally sounded when we first put up the tape. I don't remember that, but we did a lot of modifications to it to modernize it. And he did that wonderful guitar solo that I love. And yeah, that was a good time working on that song. I remember doing the hand claps, and it was just a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's actually the demo originates from 1979, I believe, and it
Yeah.
was that version of it was released on the Super Deluxe edition of Sign of the Times.
Oh, I don't remember that. Okay, I'll
Um,
go back to that and listen.
yeah, that's a great. The original version is great, but the revised version, if you will, for Sign of the Times, the updated, modernized version, is holds a special place near and dear to my heart because sonically, I would say it's like a musical version of Sunshine for me when I
Oh,
listen to it.
that's
It's very,
lovely.
very, very bright and very poppy, and just instantly puts me in a good mood with the tempo, the rhythm, and you know everything about the song. I mean, the drums, the keyboards, everything all together just makes the equivalent for me of Sunshine. If you could listen to Sunshine, in my mind,
Mm.
it would sound like I Could Never Take the Place of Your Man, which is very interesting because when we get to the lyrics, I'll mention something interesting about that. But yeah, but just musically, it's the epitome of happiness for me
Mm,
on a record.
that's interesting. I think one of the big factors contributing to that happiness is the background vocal arrangement. The
Yes,
ooh, ooh, ooh. It's got a very pop background vocal arrangement that lifts the whole thing up. Uh, Very high backing vocals tend to do that for a record, tends to lift them straight up. And then there's lots of percussion, there's the claps, and there's tambourine, a big hi-hat running all the way through that record that really helps propel it forward. So it is working rather joyfully from the rhythmic aspect. It's working joyfully from his melody and from his lyrics. I mean, the lyrics are talking about a situation that's sad, but there's happiness there. He's singing that whole record with a smile on his
right,
face, from top to bottom, and we feel that.
right. I was going to say that lyrically, it it excites me lyrically too because there's a whole juxtaposition of this unfortunate story about this young woman who's been, you know, uh, she's pregnant and she's been abandoned basically by her partner, by her lover, and she's asking she's asking this man if he wants to dance, and he's like, no, it's not a good idea. So he's kind of rejecting her, but it's kind of playful, but the undertone is really sad and unfortunate.
Yeah.
So the juxtaposition of that story with the happy, rhythmic music really sends a dopamine rush to my brain, and it appeals to my intellectual side like, wow, um, it's really interesting and really fascinating how that works. The juxtaposition of you know, the the sad lyrics or the sad
Yeah.
story with the happy music. So it really gets me lyrically in that sense as well.
That's an interesting production technique that people can do is you can have contrast between what the music is saying and what the lyrics are saying. It's not done as often as I would like. It's a very effective technique because what it does is it kind of fans the record out a little bit and it gives it layers of meaning.
Right.
It can touch you in a lot of different ways. Yeah, if you didn't understand the English language and you didn't know what the record was about, you'd probably just get pure joy from it. But if you understand the words, you get a story and you can picture that story and you can imagine the characters in the story. Then the record breaks down and he goes into a soulful thing. and he does that great guitar solo. So it starts off pop,
Yes.
it goes into kind of a rock thing, and then at some points it gets really soulful and kind of funky. And that's another thing that's marvelous about it. It takes you mentally on a long journey through a few
Yes.
different styles. The album version is over 6 minutes long. It's on the, we talked about the musical dimensions, but on the aesthetic dimensions, between novelty and familiarity, it does that wonderful thing which is common to all successful pop tracks, of being just that perfect blend of familiarity and novelty. So it's familiar in that the drum pattern is familiar. There's nothing unusual about the chord changes or anything like that. The lyrics are simple and easy to understand. It's familiar. We know where it's coming from, but it's unfamiliar in the fact that it goes through these different styles, from pop to kind of a rock thing, a classic rock solo, and then into a soulful thing. So that's novel enough to keep our attention and make it not just another Prince song, but actually kind of a special Prince song. In terms of realism, for me, my favorite visual fantasy that I enjoy when I'm listening to the music I love is I love picturing the musicians in the studio. So this record, made with all realistic instruments, lets me have the fantasy I like. My co-author, Ogi Ogas, Ogi is just the opposite of me. Ogi does not like to picture the musicians at all. He doesn't like music with lyrics in it. Ogi likes electronic music. So it wouldn't satisfy, this record would not satisfy Ogi. It just wouldn't be his thing. On the level of authenticity, it's totally, to me, genuine and profound, as everything that Prince did was. He's never, on record, Prince was never bored. He was never just phoning it in. He was always committed to every single performance in the studio.
Right. That glorious guitar solo that you hear right before it goes into the bluesy breakdown
Yeah,
is one of the best solos I think Prince ever recorded.
for me
And
too.
it's just really, really uplifting and a really, really great element of the track. But yeah. And then the second record I chose for contrast, but I also chose it because they're my second favorite artist or group, or however you want to word it. They're my second favorite next to Prince, and that is Nirvana,
Mm.
which is kind of says something unique to me because they can't be any more different in terms of musical quality and genre and all that. But Heart Shaped Box by Nirvana uh, was one of my favorite songs and still is, but especially was one of my favorite songs in my early teen years because um, the main thing that I go to, which I love the music as well, but the main thing that hooks me with this song is the lyrics
Mm.
because I think they're simple yet they're really poetic, and a lot of Kurt Cobain's lyrics are abstract. These are abstract somewhat, but not to a degree where they're totally undecipherable or anything like that. But they're very poetic, and
Mm.
I love the first lyric of the song because I happen to be my astrological sign is Pisces.
Mm.
So the line, she eyes me like a Pisces when I am weak. Um, it makes me think, just the evocation of that astrological sign, which Kurt was a Pisces himself.
Mm.
Um, it just makes me wonder about, what exactly is eyeing someone like a Pisces? What exactly does that entail? And I still haven't figured it out, but it's a question that fascinates me, and it strikes me as very, very poetic and very, very meaning. There's very much meaning behind that, but I can't quite work out what it is. But it,
Yeah.
it fascinates me. And
Now, a lot of what you're saying is that this record lands really close to your sweet spot on lyric writing, meaning that
yes,
on some level it's understandable, but on another level, it's rather enigmatic. So you
Yes.
get the gist of what he's saying, but you don't know exactly what he means. And for you, lyrically, that's satisfying. What about the other elements of it? Like, well, just anything about the style of it or the rhythm or anything?
The rhythm is the rhythm is very, very intoxicating. It's very mellow in the verses. Um, very mellow in the verses, very poetic. Um, and it's telling this sort of creepy story, but it's creepy in a loving way, if that if I can say it that way, but it's kind of odd. But um, you know, he's been locked in a heart-shaped box for 4 weeks, and he says, "I've been drawn into your magnet tar pit trap."
Yeah, what does that mean?
Yeah, what does it mean? I don't know what it means, but it's poetic and it's deep, and I like it.
There's a scholar whose work I read as I was writing this book, and he talked about how lyrics often resemble inner speech, the voice inside our own heads. So, take, for example, Whitney Houston. She'll say, I need a man to take a chance. And then, so she's talking to herself, let's say, I need a man who'll take a chance. And then she's talking to someone else. Don't you want to dance? And that song, I want to dance with somebody. So sometimes lyrics feel like that. It feels like sometimes stream of consciousness, or the artist talking to themselves, or just making up words that seem to make sense. Don McLean's American Pie is the greatest example of that.
Yeah.
People asked him afterward, what does it mean? And he would say things like, it just means I'll never have to work again, because he was just kind of riffing. But people attached or looked for meaning in these words. So we don't know. Kurt is gone. He's no longer with us. We don't know what exactly he meant, but that's okay. And this is why music can feel so personal to us. We can make up our own interpretation of what it means, and we can be
Right,
very satisfied with that.
right. It's just fascinating to me because this song, with lyrical examples, I can provide um some more, but this song and the album as a whole, Nirvana's In Utero, used very medical imagery to talk about the human condition, and I guess the condition of the human spirit, I guess you could say. And it's very interesting for me having, with cerebral palsy, I've spent a lot of time in hospitals, and I've had
Mm.
numerous surgeries for different things, not relating to my disability per se, but although some have been, but I've been exposed to a lot of hospitals in my life, and the medical imagery across the whole album speaks to me. So a line like, I wish I could eat your cancer when you turn black. It's like, to me, I interpret that as, an act of, a saving act, or an act of, helping the person
Mm.
get rid of their illness, get rid of
Mm.
what's ailing them, a loving act. Um, but it's kind of a morbid in another sense. So
Yeah.
yeah, lyrically, it really resonates with me. I don't know how much deeper I can get with that, but it's really lyrically resonant for me. And musically, like I say, the verses are really mellow. Quite common with Nirvana's music as a whole. I think the verses are usually pretty mellow, and then the chorus really ramps up with these fuzzy,
Yeah.
crunchy guitars. And you got that almost, guttural, screaming where he says, "Hey, wait, I've got a new complaint, forever in debt to your priceless advice." And again, lyrically and meaning wise, it struck a chord with me because it's kind of that sarcastic, angsty point of view that a teenager would have towards
Right.
life. You know, Oh yeah, I'm forever in debt to your priceless advice, you know. And teenagers, when we're teenagers, we tend to complain a lot and gripe about everything. So it's like, hey, wait, I've got a new complaint, I'm always complaining, always feeling that need to sort of complain and object and rebel against this, sense of angst that I have. So as a teenager, it really resonated with me in terms of timbre, the sound, the aggressiveness of the guitars.
Mhm.
Again, underline that feeling of angst, that feeling of, you know, sarcasm, of frustration. Um, and I think that's why Nirvana appeals to me so much, is because in my teen years is when it really hit home psychologically that, I'm never gonna be able to do normal, quote unquote, normal things, right? Like normal people do. And so hearing that sort of rage and frustration play out in the instrumentation of the song really resonated with me, because it was a place to channel my own rage and my own frustration and my own sarcasm and my own darkness in these, you know, pounding, crunchy, fuzzy notes.
Mm.
This real heavy music. It was a place where all my own anger and frustration could dissipate through the sound of the music. I don't know if that makes sense to you, Susan, or not.
Makes perfect sense. And isn't that wonderful? There's nothing better than that when that happens.
Yeah,
So when an artist has a seed, a spark of inspiration, they get that notepad and they write out those lyrics. They get that guitar and they come up with those chord changes and they figure out what that rhythm's going to be. They're expressing something about their own lives that they want to put out there in the world. And they do. They go into the studio and they make a record and they put that out there in the world. But the endlessly fascinating mystery to me is that other people, yourself, me, and other people, can listen to that seed, or rather consume the fruit of the plant that seed grew, and it becomes a whole new thing. So what the song means to you feels so true and so right and so spot on for what you would like to say. For me, it's slightly different. For Kurt Cobain, it was slightly different.
yeah,
Yet we're all agreeing that this song is great. It's working for us, even though our situations, our conditions, our genders, our ages are different. It
yeah,
all works for us on a human level. We're both incredibly unique and incredibly similar. That's a remarkable thing about music. There's one
yeah,
other thing I want to say about Heart Shaped Box, and
yeah.
slightly contradicts something you said earlier. You were saying that Prince and Nirvana couldn't be further apart. I think Kurt Cobain and Prince lived closer in their neighborhoods than you might imagine.
Really?
It, oh yeah, it's been famously said that Kurt Cobain was, in his heart of hearts, a pop artist. He hated himself for that, but he loved the Beatles. He listened to pop music, and if you listen to this record, Heart Shaped Box, pay attention to the background vocal. That background vocal is pure pop. You can hear his Beatles influence in his work. Now, the style of music he was doing in the day was grunge music, but you can tell, especially with those sparse verses, he's using the verse in the classic way. Verse is set up, chorus is the payoff.
Yep,
Verse is rather
yep,
small, chorus gets big. That's
yep,
pop.
yep.
Pop music writing. And you can also tell Kurt Cobain had an ear for melody. He liked melody. He wrote some memorable melodies. Prince, too. Prince grew up with funk and soul. He knew jazz, he knew blues, but When Prince would sit at the piano, he'd start playing a little jazz and he'd turn it around and he'd walk it right back to pop. He'd start playing a little blues, but he was never a pure blues musician because that river of pop inspiration flowed so strong and so deep in him. I think Kurt and Prince were very similar styles of writers in
Oh,
a certain way.
fascinating. That kind of makes me feel validated in a big way for
Yeah.
loving them as much as I do. So I from that from that inference, I would say that my sweet spot tends to lean more towards pop. Would you say that in my?
I think you like melody. Clearly, you're a fan of melody,
Yep.
and clearly you're a fan of lyrics, and those two dimensions are dimensions that you favor over some of the others. Now, here's another thing about the listener profile. Some of these dimensions are preferred for us compared to others. Not always. We might like them all equally. Others we don't care about. So sometimes when people will say to you, I never listen to the words, they're telling the truth.
Yeah.
When they say that, it means the lyrics, when their brain goes scanning music for a treat, it doesn't even bother looking at the lyrical content. It doesn't care. It doesn't
Yeah.
have a strong, powerful star or sweet spot over there in lyrics town, but over in rhythm, or it might be timbre or something like that, they have very strong preferences.
Yeah. Yeah, I tend to favor lyrical music over instrumentals. There are a few instrumentals that I absolutely love, but I can probably count them on one hand, as opposed to how
Mm,
many songs I love with lyrics. So
mm.
that's very true for me.
I'll tell you, my three strongest attractors are melody, rhythm, and novelty. When I go listening to music, I'm listening for new ideas and innovation, and I get so thrilled when I hear records that feature some just cleverness in terms of, it can be anything, it can be the lyric writing or the style or the arrangement, but boy, I love that novelty. Gotta have my novelty. I
Yeah,
love rhythm. I'm a groove-based, always been a groove-based record producer. That rhythm's gotta at least be strong enough to engage me. If a song is rhythmically weak, I'm not going to be interested in that record. And melody matters greatly to me. A beautiful melody will captivate me so instantly.
yeah. I would say that rhythm is right up there with lyrics in terms of
Mm.
and melody in terms of what I love the most, and I think that that quality was instilled in me largely by listening to Prince's music,
Yeah.
because Prince has an exceptional sense of rhythm and an exceptional uh, use of rhythm and throughout his whole catalog. So that really grew to be one of my loves musically is rhythm, and also like an artist that inspired Prince. Like I think of somebody like James Brown as well. Same type of thing, with that soul music. Rhythm is a very important aspect of that type of music, and it's something that really resonates with me. Yeah, so lyrics, melody, and rhythm are probably my top three.
Mm.
Um, Novelty, I kind of when I read the chapter on novelty, I was like, how much how much do I really like novelty? But I was wondering if I had really a complete sense of what novelty is and how you define it, because there might be some elements of novelty or some degree of novelty that I like in music, but if something's totally avant garde and off the wall, to where it's unintelligible to me, then that kind of turns me off. But a small degree of novelty might excite me or
Yeah.
motivate me to listen more. But can you talk a little bit about novelty and what exactly it is and what exactly you
Yeah.
love about it?
Yeah, for your listeners, I'm taking a very famous bell curve. The bell curve is used to describe people's height and weight and IQ and all that. It's just a distribution of norms. So I'm taking a famous bell curve from 1971 where the x-axis was simplicity versus complexity, and I'm superimposing that on music and using it for music. So the simplest music of all is not appealing to adults because the simplest music of all is children's music. Barney the Purple Dinosaur, I love you, you love me, or Baby Shark, do 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 do, Baby Shark. Adults aren't going to be grooving to that record. It's just too simple, too repetitive. It's not complex enough. It's too boring for adults. But that's at the far left side of the bell curve. If you look now at the far right side of the bell curve with the greatest complexity, the music that is the most complex is music that at least tries to be completely unpredictable, and that's freeform jazz. It'll change keys unexpectedly, it'll be atonal, it'll sometimes be arrhythmic. It tries deliberately to be completely unpredictable. A lot of adults don't listen to that either because it's too cognitively taxing. It's too chaotic. It's too complex. In the
Right.
center of the bell curve, the big hump in the middle, is where we find pop music because the y-axis here is record sales. Children's music doesn't sell to adults. Freeform jazz doesn't sell a lot to adults. Pop music has managed to strike the perfect balance between some familiar elements of music, like a 4/4 time signature or maybe consonant intervals and things like that, coupled with some novelty. The novelty these days tends to be in the sound design, in the timbres. Sometimes the novelty can be in the lyrics, people writing about things that we normally haven't heard about in songs. We just passed through 40 years of innovation in rhythm, and I think we're finally working our way out of that trend and working toward the days of innovative sound design. So the records we're likely to hear on the pop charts today will most likely have some innovative sounds coupled with a very familiar form. Now,
Right.
because the bell curve is symmetrical, there are just as many people on the left side of the curve as there are on the right. On the left side of the curve, we have music listeners like my brothers. My brothers love music, and what they listen to is classic rock. They like new music if it follows the form of classic rock, which is getting increasingly rare. They like music the way they like sports. When they watch sports, they're seeing something they've seen hundreds of times. It could be a football game or baseball game. You know how the game's going to go. There aren't going to be many surprises here. What they want to know is how this game is going to go. And they want to see a familiar game played at the highest level. Likewise, when they listen to their rock music, they want to hear a classic form of music played by the best of the best. Now, for me, rock music, I love it, I appreciate it, but when I am seeking out new music, I've got a stronger appetite for things I've never heard before. It could be sounds I've never heard before. Often these days, it's arrangements I've never heard before. Surprise me, give me a stronger thrill of surprise. My brothers would not be interested in that music, the music that I like. We're on opposite sides of the bell curve there.
Okay. I would say I'm somewhere in between,
Mm.
leaning ever so slightly to the side of your brothers because
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty traditional with what I like, but I do like novelty and innovation. Like I love, like when you were describing novelty and different sounds and stuff. Of course, it's not revolutionary revolutionary anymore, but at the time, a record like Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club
Right.
Band by the Beatles was very innovative and very avant-garde, and I love that type of stuff. And even some of Nirvana's stuff incorporates different sounds, and
Yeah.
the sound of guitar feedback is just as much an instrument, if you
Mm.
will, as the guitar itself. And
Yeah.
so different things like that I can appreciate, but
Yeah.
overall, I lean towards a more uh, traditional, predictable stuff. And that's not to
Yeah.
say that's not to say that novelty doesn't excite me. It's just like not near one of my
Right.
spots.
Now,
Again.
the left side of the curve is where all our classic forms of music lie. And there are a lot of music lovers who love these forms. Bluegrass,
Yep.
reggae, folk, even disco is now a classic form. So last night I was in Wisconsin, in Madison, Wisconsin, and I was sharing the stage with a music professor at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. Daniel Graboy is his name. And he told a story in 1979. He and his friend, they were at a disco, they were at a club. The floor was packed, everybody's dancing, and a new record came on, and it just cleared the floor. Nobody wanted to dance to this record. And Daniel loved it instantly. At first listen, he loved it. The record was The Message by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. It's
Oh
like a gentle
wow.
soprano. I keep myself. Don't push me because I'm close to the edge. It cleared out the floor. Nobody knew how to dance to that. Nobody liked it. It was too novel. It was brand new. This is when rap was really starting to emerge. And that was, of
Right.
course, the first rap hit single. But it's
Right.
interesting because in 1979, people didn't know how to dance to it. But if you played that on the dance floor now, nobody would dance to it, but for a different reason. It would be too familiar. We know it too well. Dance and music co-evolve with one another. So music, popular music, is by, for, and about young people. And in general, musicians are trying to make music that will help people find each other and connect with each other. And people who want to connect with each other are going to popularize the music that helps them connect with one another. It's always going to change, generation to generation. It's always going to change. If Heart-Shaped Box came out today, it would be considered pretty tame. Same thing with I Could Never Take the Place of Your Man. But I to Prince's credit, his music does age pretty well.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. But yeah, it's been interesting talking to you about these seven dimensions. And like I say, I'll say it again. Please, if you're a music lover, if you're a music listener, please get this book and check it out.
Thank you.
It's available now. And Susan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for telling your listeners about this book. I do hope that they read it, and I hope that they get to know their listener profile. And I really hope that more people will get together and have a record pull. Have some people over to the house, have a few friends. It's nice when it's about 4 or 5 people, maybe a little more, but have a record pull, and you'll learn something about your friends, and you'll get turned on to some new music, and you'll do the same for them.
Yeah, and I've loved the part of the book that resonated most with me, I would say, was towards the end of the book where you talk about how music can actually shape our identities and
Mm-hmm.
get us closer to our true selves than really any other art form can. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah. So we didn't talk about the default network. So the default network is a network of neural assemblies of nuclei. And it's so called the default network because it's the brain network that gets active when we go into our own heads. So if you ask people in the laboratory, are you thinking about something other than what you're doing right now? 30 to 50% of the time, people will say yes. That's what a human brain does. It's focused on the outside world, and then it goes into its own thoughts. Then it goes back to the outside world and into its own thoughts. Now, that default network, which is busy a good portion of our day, it's sitting there minding its own business, and you're carried away with your own thoughts and your own feelings, and you're in your own head. When we put music on to listen to, it turns out that the music we like is really good at activating that default network. So when you're listening to music you love, your default network gets active. Your default network just so happens to be concerned with your self-image, your self-awareness, your self-consciousness, your self-identity. So music truly, and music listening in particular, truly lets us experience ourselves in a way that no other art form can. It feels so private and so intimate, in part because it activates our sense of self. No other art form does it this effectively.
Right.
This has been shown in laboratory studies. So I like to use, and I've been using it for 40 years, the phrase, the music of me, or the music of you.
Right.
When I listen to the music I love the most, that's the music of me, meaning that's my musical self-identity. That's the music I would write and play and perform if I could. That's
Right.
my musicianship. And likewise with all of us, our listener abilities are our musical abilities as well.
Right. It's funny that you say that because it reminds me of a quote by Prince, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically says, "If you want to know me, listen to my music."
I agree with that.
That's
Yep.
exactly it. So that's a good spot to end on, and enjoy your semi-retirement. And if you're up to anything, I hope you'd let us know, and we'll have you back on the podcast. And you're such a lovely guest,
Thank you.
and I'm really, really happy and honored to have you on again. And it was just an absolute pleasure. So thank you so much.
Thank
Um,
you, Chris. I
is
really appreciate it.
is there any way for people who want to reach you?
So I'm no good with the social media, although 2 days ago I finally got on Twitter. I wanted to help Prince fans know if I was speaking in their town, so they can come out and they can ask Prince questions. So if you wanted to reach me on Twitter, and bear with me here because I'm just figuring out how it works, but it's at with the little at symbol and then
Yep.
all one word, Susan Tiwisl, which is short for This Is What It Sounds Like. Susan Tiwisl. So that's
Okay.
the Twitter thing. And then you can always reach me. You can email me on the book's website, which is all one word, thisiswhatitsoundslike.com.
Okay. Thank you very much, Susan Rogers, ladies and gentlemen. And we'll see you next time. This is Chris Johnson saying peace and be wild.
Bye, Chris. You're great. It's nice talking with you.